In this video, I'm going to show you how to set this up using conditional modifiers. You can see that player 1 is indicated as the current player because it's got a green background and the text here. Player 2 is not the current player. When I toggle to player 2, you'll see that the modifiers switch out. Player 1 is now inactive and player 2 is active. So let's get into it. Alright, so what I've done a little preparation here to save us some time. This is just a standard SwiftUI based iOS application, and I've laid out a sort of a prototype view here. And I'll just go through it quickly. So down here we got a button, and when you click this button, it's going to toggle between making player 1 active to player 2 active and disable player 1 and then toggle and so on. Now you can see right now that I've laid these out manually over here, and we've got some text strings. So the first thing we need to do is, obviously, as we look at this, we recognize that essentially both of these VStacks are the same except for the data within them, right? Which, the first thing we need to do is look at that and go, okay, so I should definitely fix that. So I'm going to make a new view, and I'm going to say new file, make a new SwiftUI view. I'm going to call it player view. And then in there, I'm just going to take that text there and replace it. I'm going to save that. I'm going to hit resume. And we get exactly the same thing, right? Player 1, 100, current player, and so on, because that's what we've got here in the text. Let's go back over to content view, right? So we don't need this player here anymore, right? This one can go, and we can put in a new instance of our player view, like so, and we get exactly the same results. Perfect. Now, as we look at this, of course, we now realize that, the idea here is to replace both. So we're going to do that. And we're going to hit our first problem, which is we now got these two static views here with the text, and they're both current players. Let's go back over to the player view and fix that up. So we need to be able to supply a player name and the score to each of these views. So of course, the way we're going to do that is we're going to use some state and some variables. So the first one is the name. Now the name's not going to change. The score will change over time, obviously. So I'm going to just say here, let player name of type string, and then the next one is gonna be state, because that's gonna change, right? So we'll say player score, and we'll just make this an integer for this example, right? Now your first thing you're gonna notice is it's gonna complain about a couple of things here. So you can see that I've missed off the var there, so I'm just gonna put that in. But down here it's saying, hey, you know what, you've got these properties up here, you need to supply them to this preview that I'm showing you over here in Xcode. So fine, we'll just hit fix. We're going to put in a player name, and I'm just going to call this player 1. I'm going to spell 1 so that you can see this one changes here. All right, and then it's also going to want a score. I'm just going to make it 150 so that again you can see that number changes over here. So the next change is we no longer want these to be static text properties, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take this out, and we're going to tell it to use the variable player name, and that's going to fix that one, right? And then I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to say, you know what, we also need to change the score, and so I want you to use the variable player score for that, right? Going to save that and hit resume. It's going to foul because what it's saying is, hey, you know what, you need to fix up over here as well. So we actually have everything we need here in our new sub view. Let's go back to our main view, and again it's going to say, you know what, hey buddy, you need to put in these arguments. So I'm going to do it here, and I'm going to say player 1, and again we'll make this score 150, and then for this one I'm going to say it's player 2, and they've got 356 because they're really good at whatever this game is. All right, go back over to the player here and hit try again. And now you can see that it's taken the player 1 and the 150 from this preview example down here. If I go back over to the content view here, you can now see that we've now got both of our instances being powered by the properties within those views from the data that we're sending in. Perfect. So now what we need to do is set up the conditional settings here to make current player only show for the current player. And we only want one of these to be the current player, right? the one that's not active, not the current player, we want to have that gray background. So that's where the conditional modifiers come in. So let's get into that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go back over to player view here. And we need to be able to hide and show this current player based on which instance of this view is the current player, right? So the way we're going to do that is we are going to start by adding a variable up here, and we're just going to say var is current player. And that's going to be a Boolean, okay? And then what's going to happen is it's going to say, hey, you know what? You need to supply this argument. That's fine. We're just going to say it's false. And let's save that. Let's hit resume. And what's going to happen is it's not going to be able to build because, just like before, we now need to supply that new argument over here in our view that uses the instances. So for right now, I'm just going to set both of them to false. I'm going to save it and ask it to resume the view. So when they're both false, right, we don't want this to be displayed. So back over here now, this H stack, which displays the current player, we can wrap that in some very straightforward logic here. We're just going to say if is current player is true, right? So we're just going to say if it's true, go ahead and show this stack, right? And if it's not, then don't show it. And I'll save it. And as you can see, because we've got it set false in the preview here for Xcode, it doesn't show. If I change this one to true, it's now going to show, which is exactly what we want to see, right? So I'm just going to set that back to false. Save that. Let's go back over to our content view, right? This is updated. So right now we don't see it on either one. Let's say that player 2 is actually the current player. So I'm going to set that one to true. And what you'll see is we get the result that we want, right? So now we need to, I'll just set that back to false. Now we need to set our logic here to say, hey, when I hit this button, I need to toggle between these views, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to add a variable. I'm going to add a state here that says current player. And I'm just going to keep this very simple for the argument of this video and demonstration. And I'm just going to make it an int. And we'll just set it to 1, right? So that by default, it's player 1. And what you're going to find is, I've made a mistake there. Actually, I should have put var. Whoops. It's going to be fine here and it's going to run, right? But now we need to change this argument here because we're just hard coded to false. So we need to query current player. So we're going to say current player, right? And we're going to say if current player equals 1, right? And I'm just using a ternary operator here to keep the logic and the code short and simple. So if it's 1, it's going to be true. Actually, sorry, that should be there. True. Otherwise, I want it to be false. So if you're not familiar with the ternary, what it is, it's saying it's kind of like an if statement here in a very short version of the code. So query the current player value, and if it's equal to 1, then do the first thing after the question mark, which is set it to true. Otherwise, set it to false, right? Now I'm going to take this here, and I'm going to copy it and put it down here. And obviously what we need here is 2, right? So if it's the second player, set it to true. Otherwise, set it to false. I'm going to save that. Now, down here in the logic for our button, we need to toggle that. So, you know, there's many different ways you can do this. I'm going to keep the logic here very simple and very readable so that you can focus on, you know, the modifier part that we're doing here. So I'm just going to say, hey, if current player is equal to 1, then I need to toggle it to player 2, right? Because I've hit the button to go to the next player, so I don't want it to be 1 anymore. I want it to be 2. Otherwise, if it's not 1, right, then we need to set it to 1 because we need it to be our first player, right? Very simple logic there. Very just a straightforward, just for the argument's sake. You know, in the actual program, if you was using this, you would do this a better way, but this will do for what we need in the video. I'm going to run it in the simulator here. All right, so current player is player 1. Sorry, player 1 is current player, and player 2 is not the current player. If I hit the next player, you'll see that it'll now toggle, right? So player 1 is no longer the current player. Player 2 is the current player, and it's just going to sit there. Every time I click it, it's going to toggle through them. So that's the first part taken care of. Let's stop this and go back to our code here. What we now need to do is have this background color change as well to indicate which is the current player. All right, so let's hide that bottom panel there, get a bit of room back. Now I'm going to hit resume on here, like so. Okay, that's all nice and clean. And then what I'm going to do is I want to show you where I got the code, the original code for this. On the forums.swift.org, there was this post about conditionally applying modifier modifier in SwiftUI. And Confused Vorlon here has this extension, which is where I borrowed the code from. So full credit to them for this. And what this function does is it says, you know, hey, if true, right? So we call this and we provide it a Boolean. And if the Boolean is true, it's going to return with these modifiers attached. And if it's false, it's just going to return it without the modifiers. Now, I'm just going to hide that there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new file. Just going to make a Swift file. I'm going to call it view extensions. Now in here, we do need to import SwiftUI. And then I'm going to paste in the version that I'm using here. So again, if we've got the condition and then if it does the returns. So I'm just going to save that file. We're just going to leave that straight as is. And you can, you know, feel free to use my version, or of course, you know, look at the version in the forums themselves and go with that one. They're basically the same thing at the end of the day. Now, what we can do, because we've got that extension, we can take advantage of it in our views here, right? So where do we want to do this? Well, what we want to do, and I'm just going to hit resume here, is we really want to do it when the button toggles, right? Now, currently, you know, like I said, they've both got the green background. Let's look at player view here. And the reason being is because obviously I've got this background modifier here, right? So we do really need to change this one as well. So now what we can do is we can again capitalize on our isCurrentPlayer Boolean value here, right? And because it's an extension to the view, that extension is available for any views. So what we can do is we can implement that here as well. So we want to keep the padding, but we want to add it here before the background, right? So I'm just going to hit return a couple of times to get some space. Now what we're going to do then is we are going to say .if, and then we're going to say, okay, we need the Boolean. So isCurrentPlayer. If that's true, I want you to do something for me, right? And then what I want it to do is I want it to take this background color here, all right? So I'm just going to copy that and remove that from here. So we're going to be a little bit messy at first. Just hang in there. And I'm going to paste this in. Now, we need to supply an argument here, and we're going to put $0. We're going to take the first argument, right? And we're going to say .background, and then it's going to want a color, right? So we've got our modifier here. Let me just clean up the spacing here a little bit. So let's save that, right? So if it's set for that and it's true, then we want the background to be this green color. Because it's not true at the moment, you can see we've got no color at all, right? So what we can do is if it's not current player, I'm going to copy and paste this in. But we're going to change this to gray, right? So now you see we've got this gray, right? So if I change this to true, it's going to be green with the current player text, right? And if I change this to false, it's going to be gray without the player. Perfect. That is exactly what we want. All based off of our isCurrentPlayer value here, or this Boolean. So we actually don't need to do anything over here, right? You can see it's already updated because it's all based off of this setting that we've got up here, this evaluation. So this should be everything we need. Let's go ahead and run this. Player 1 is the current player with the green background. Player 2 is gray. Hit next player. We got it. There we go. Player 1 is now gray. Player 2 is the current player with the green background. We now have our conditional modifiers. You can put any modifiers you want in there for this, but as you can see, look, that is exactly how it's going to work, thanks to that wonderful extension. So that's it. If this has been helpful, let me know. You can reach out to me on Twitter @CompileSwift, or leave a comment in the notes here. Give it a thumbs up. Subscribe for more videos. There's plenty more Swift learning to be done at compileswift.com. And, if you really want to say thank you, there is a Patreon support level where you can have access to currently all of the ad-free versions of the podcast. And, you can also buy me a coffee as well. It's down in the links in the description. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you.